remote viewer in his book Penetration says he saw in one of his remote viewing sessions structures on the moon. Richard C. Hoagland, of course, not only believes in structures on Mars, but also the moon. You've got your thoughts on the Mars as well. Go ahead.
Absolutely. I think there are a number of locations on Mars that are nothing I would say qualifies as proof. I don't think that we know there are artifacts on Mars, of course, for our own landers and rovers. But I do think that there is enough evidence, certainly, to qualify as a genuine scientific mystery. And I've always been disappointed in the way it's treated in the mainstream media. I'd like to see a more even-handed approach, and the condescending remarks typical of the mainstream media I just find it discouraging. I think we can do better. I don't know why the notion is so ludicrous. I suppose some of it comes from the fact that the so-called face on Mars looks face-like, and that lends itself to claims of pareidolia, where we're seeing a face because we're geared to see faces.
It's like looking at cloud patterns, right? And you
exactly. And there is an element of that. And certainly the people who say that, well, I don't see a face, they're not lying. There's a case to be made for it not being a face. It's a case to be made for it being a face. There is a physiological predisposition to see faces, but there's also a parallel or orthogonal phenomenon that where you see a face and you don't recognize it for a face, or broadly speaking, patterns, or we don't make the match. So the common skeptical argument against the face specifically is that, well, you're seeing a face because you want to see a face, and your mind is primed for that. But the other argument that perhaps you're not seeing a face because your brain is primed not to, you don't hear much about that. So it's an interesting crash course in epistemology when you get into the whole Mars artifacts debate. And, there are formations that are just quite suggestive. And I think that if we saw them on satellite images in, say, the Mideast, that we would be all over them. When I was writing the book, I found some images that were some photographs taken on Earth of Iran back in the 1920s or 30s. I can't remember which decade, but they were taken on an aerial reconnaissance mission looking for archaeological sites. And some of the formations were just they were so large that they could have passed for landforms, and they were so incredibly symmetrical and everything. And I couldn't help but look at these pictures and wonder, if we saw these on Mars, would we give them a second look? The fact that it's on another planet, we automatically dismiss it. Well, it has to be geological. But why necessarily? Why the aversion to artifacts on other planets? I think that's a question that we should be asking. I mean, Carl Sagan, for example, was quite vocal about the chances for encountering artifacts on other planets of the solar system. He was vocal about finding things on the moon. He figured that if we were visited once every 20,000 years, then there was a good chance that we might detect some sort of automated platform on the moon, maybe to monitor our own development. And, that might have been the inspiration for the monolith in 2001 by Stanley Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke. So these aren't exactly fringe ideas. Eric von Daniken came along and started basically crying wolf, in a lot of cases, and I think that turned a lot of researchers off. And it's compelling to wonder what course this inquiry would have taken had the ancient astronaut movement not achieved the notoriety and the popularity that it did at the time.
Can you imagine what it would be like for astronauts, Mac, either to go to the moon or go to Mars and see these structures? Let's assume, for example, that our astronauts didn't see them on the moon, but can you just imagine, first time perhaps?
Oh, I mean, I can't think of a more awe-inspiring cinematic moment, yeah. I mean,
the old heart would be beating like crazy.
Yeah, and it would change everything in a stroke. It would change how we approach space. It would approach how we addressed our own history, our own genetic legacy, our own historical trajectory. I mean, everything would change overnight if we could confirm, if we had an irrefutable discovery of extraterrestrial ruins on another body in our solar system. And then on the same token, if we found an intact UFO or enough of an object that we could conclude that it did not originate on this planet but was intelligently constructed, the same scenario would essentially play out. The question is, if the objects on Mars are artificial, and I think there's a good chance that some of them are. And that's the amazing thing about this, is that it's not just an exercise in asking questions. I think that there is some good evidence that some might be. So if we were to find out that they were artificial, the first question I would want to know is what level of sophistication, what was the builders' level of sophistication? Were they more advanced than us? Were they a spacefaring civilization that, stopped on Mars for whatever reason and traveled on or whatever? Or did they evolve on Mars? Were they indigenous to the planet? That would tell us a lot about how civilizations develop, how intelligence arises. So that would open up a whole new science. And
it sure would.
I can't think of anything more explosive and perhaps more damaging to our collective ego than that.
Do you see the day where we truly will stumble across some of these artifacts and reveal it back to us, or do you think they'll cover it up?
Well, I mean, there's reason to suspect that some of it might be covered up immediately. I wrote a piece for a website devoted to SETI not long ago, and I posed the argument, let's say that the SETI project picked up an irrefutably extraterrestrial signal, something obviously created by an intelligent civilization. Why would we assume that this would immediately be made public? Now, I know that the SETI Institute, for example, there's the international charter about how the news would be disseminated among the astronomical community. So it might not be easy to cover up, but nevertheless, I can't help but think, why do we assume that an extraterrestrial signal would be inherently benign or just free of any sort of content that might be used for nefarious means, if put to the wrong purpose? For example, I mean, we always expect something innocuous emanating from the depths of space, like binary numbers or whatever. And that may very well be if it's simply a civilization that's trying to get our attention. But maybe they're trying to tell us something about, maybe they're not telling us that they're on their way and they're going to invade, but maybe they're warning us about some sort of stellar cataclysm in our niche of the galaxy. Maybe a star is going to explode, and they're sending out an omnidirectional broadcast to warn emerging civilizations of the danger. What good would that do the public to know that we've got 300 years, to live or something like that? I'm just making this up, but there are real reasons. There are damaging events happening all the time, and space is a very violent place. And I can easily envision an extraterrestrial civilization or a network of extraterrestrial civilizations that communicate among themselves with beacons and warn each other of things that are coming down the pike on the interstellar level, things that might render entire star systems extinct. So, I mean, if we were to receive data that referred to an upcoming event of that sort, for example, why would that be divulged necessarily? If it was just prime numbers, or we are here, or we were here rather, then I don't see a problem. But if you were to make that information public immediately, and then you were to find a subtext to the message proclaiming, that there was some sort of strategic agenda afoot, even if it was for our own greater good, if it didn't serve our civilization immediately, if there was no short-term imperative for releasing the information, I could see it being withheld for purposes of national security, and I think that's just a stark reality. I'd like to be wrong about that, but and maybe I am wrong about that. But I think that's a perspective that is too often overlooked because we think of SETI as being a very safe, existentially remote way of contacting aliens. radio signals seem.